The camera shakes, capturing only fragments of the scene: muddy ground, the sound of hooves dragging, and a faint, desperate whinny. The shaky video cuts in and out, as if the very signal is gasping for breath, mirroring the life that barely clings to a small, broken creature on the ground. The colt, skinny, covered in dirt and soaked with rain, lies under a rotting fence, its body trembling in the cold. It's a creature that should have been left to die. In the footage, an unseen voice murmurs in the background, steadying the camera with trembling hands. They said he wasn't worth saving, but the kid who found him didn't care. A figure steps into view, the camera's focus blurring briefly before it sharpens on a teenage boy. His expression is soft, almost unreadable, but those eyes burn with a quiet resolve. He's young, no more than 17, his body lean but scarred by loss. His name is Aiden Rivera, and he's the kind of kid who doesn't ask for attention. Life already gave him more than his fair share of it. He lost his parents, in a highway crash 2 years ago, and in that same accident, he lost his right arm. Everyone calls him delicate now, a fragile thing, as if surviving tragedy wasn't enough. But that boy, with his dark, determined eyes, holds a different kind of strength. The colt stirs again, its fragile head lifting weakly, struggling to breathe. Aiden doesn't flinch. With one arm, he kneels beside the creature, brushing his fingers across the colt's dirt-slick coat. He speaks softly, too softly for anyone to hear, but the words are there, wrapped in something tender. "You're not, alone," Aiden whispers. "You're not alone, little one." The video ends with the figure of Aiden standing tall, silhouetted against the dimming sky. The camera zooms out, and the title of the story flashes: "The Boy Who Trained a Horse Without Eyes." Aiden Rivera sat on the edge of his bed, his eyes fixed on the small photograph in his hand. The corners were worn, the edges bent, but it was the only thing he had left of his parents. They had been lost in the crash that had shattered his life, their laughter forever absent from the house. The photo captured a happier time, a moment when they were whole, when he was whole. Now, at 17, Aiden had become a quiet echo of the boy he once was. The world saw him as fragile. They didn't know that inside there was a fire burning, quiet, steady, and relentless. He didn't fit in with the other kids at school. How could he? How could someone who'd lost so much in every way be expected to blend in, to follow the same path as the others? The loss of his parents had shattered the foundation of his life, and the crash that took his arm had broken his body. In the eyes of others, he was a story of loss, a tragedy, someone to be pitied. But Aiden didn't need their pity. He didn't need their sympathy. What he needed, what he wanted, was to feel alive again, the kind of living that wasn't measured by how much he could do with one arm, but by how much he could accomplish, with the heart that was still beating, still fighting. His uncle, Marcus Rivera, had taken him in after the crash. Aiden's parents had been gone, and there was no one else to care for him. Marcus was a quiet man, rough around the edges, but kind in the way that only someone who had seen a lot of pain could be. He ran a small ranch on the outskirts of town, a place far from the noise of the world, where people kept their distance and let the land do the talking. Aiden had never been fond of the ranch, but it was a life he had to accept. It was a place where he could hide, where he could be away from the eyes that seemed to judge him for what he had lost. And yet, there was something about the ranch that called to him. It wasn't the long hours of manual labor or the endless miles of fence posts that needed mending. No, it was the animals, the horses. They were the only things that didn't look at him with pity or with questions. They didn't care that he only had one arm. They didn't care that he carried the weight of tragedy on his shoulders. They just needed him. Aiden spent his days working with the horses, cleaning stalls, feeding them, and fixing the fences his uncle had neglected. There was a rhythm to it all, a kind of solace in the repetitive tasks that filled his days. And in the quiet of the ranch, where the only sounds were the whinnies of horses and the rustle of trees in the wind, Aiden found a strange sense of peace. But it wasn't just about the work. It was about the connection. Aiden had always felt a kind of kinship with the horses. They were wild, free, and unbroken, just like him, or at least they were in his mind. They, too, had stories that no one could understand, scars that marked their bodies, but not their souls. It was on one of these days, while helping his uncle mend the broken fence at the far edge of the property, that Aiden heard it, a faint, desperate sound that caught his attention. He paused, looking around. His uncle didn't seem to notice, busy with his own tasks. But Aiden's senses were on high alert. There it was again, a soft, weak whimper. He moved toward the sound, pushing through the thick underbrush that separated the pastures from the woods. The trees were dense here, their branches low and heavy with rain, but Aiden moved through them with practiced ease. His steps were quiet, his one arm steady as he pushed forward, and then he saw it. A small colt, tangled in barbed wire, its body weak and trembling, its eyes empty, lifeless. Aiden's heart skipped a beat. He crouched down, assessing the situation. The colt was blind, its coat matted and dirty, its breath shallow and ragged. It had clearly been abandoned, left to die. Aiden's first instinct was to help, but how could he? He was just one person, one kid with only one arm. How could he save something that seemed so beyond saving? But then, the colt let out another soft, desperate whimper, and something inside Aiden clicked. He wasn't going to walk away. He couldn't. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "It's okay," he whispered, more to himself than to the animal. "I'm here." With his one arm, Aiden gently untangled the colt from the barbed wire, feeling the sharp pricks of metal against his skin. It didn't matter. He had to get it out, get it safe. The colt struggled weakly, but it didn't fight him. There was a trust in its eyes, a kind of quiet surrender that made Aiden's chest ache. When the colt was finally free, Aiden carefully lifted it onto his shoulder. It was heavy, its body limp and unresponsive. But Aiden didn't mind. The world had thrown him away, too, after the crash. People had treated him like he was broken, like he was useless. But he wasn't. Neither was this colt. He walked back to the house, the colt draped over his shoulders, its head resting against him. His uncle, seeing the condition of the animal, raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you find him?" he asked, his voice gruff. "A ways back," Aiden answered, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm taking him to the vet." And just like that, Aiden's life changed again. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the colt, about the connection that was forming, even if they didn't have the words to express it. The boy and the horse, both broken in different ways, but both refusing to be discarded. As Aiden drove to the vet, the colt resting beside him, he whispered softly, "You're not alone, Ekko. Not anymore." The road ahead was uncertain, filled with doubts and challenges, but Aiden had made a decision. He was going to fight for this horse, just like he was fighting for himself. The vet's office smelled of antiseptic and the sharp tang of hay. Aiden sat quietly in a corner, his eyes fixed on the colt lying on the table in front of him. Ekko, the little blind foal he had found tangled in barbed wire, was still barely breathing. But he was alive. That was the only thing that mattered right now. The vet had been gentle, her hands moving with the care of someone who understood the fragility of life. Aiden's stomach twisted as he watched the colt's shallow breaths, each one seeming to struggle against the weight of the world. The colt had been through so much in such a short time, and yet he was still here. That alone was a victory. Dr. Wheeler, the vet, leaned over the colt, her expression grim. She worked in silence for a while, taking notes, checking vitals, and cleaning the cuts on the colt's body. Aiden stayed still, barely breathing himself. He didn't want to disturb the calmness of the room. Not now. Not when the colt's future hung in the balance. When Dr. Wheeler finally spoke, Her voice was low and hesitant. "You're lucky you found him when you did," she said, her eyes meeting Aiden's. But I'm afraid the prognosis isn't good." Aiden's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, looking at the Colt again. "He's blind. There's not much we can do about that. His eyes are completely shut, and there's no sign of recovery. The blindness could be permanent, and his physical condition, he's weak, very weak." Aiden swallowed, his throat tight. He looked down at Ekko, feeling a lump form in his chest. The Colt's frailty was so apparent now that he wasn't just a bundle of mud and blood in the woods. Ekko was small, vulnerable, and alone in a world that was far too big for him. "He's a fighter," Aiden said quietly. "He's strong." Dr. Wheeler raised an eyebrow. "He's been through hell, Aiden. It's going to be hard for him." But she trailed off, her voice softening. "You've got to decide whether you're willing to put in the work. This Colt, he'll need a lot of care, a lot of time. And even then, we can't guarantee he'll make it." Aiden stood up, his mind made up before she even finished speaking. "I'm not giving up on him," he said firmly. His voice didn't waver, not even a little. "He doesn't deserve to be thrown away." Dr. Wheeler gave him a long look. She seemed to study him, as if trying to figure out if he was just another dreamer or someone who actually understood what it meant to fight for something. Someone. Finally, she sighed, a sound filled with both concern and a grudging respect. "All right, Aiden," she said, nodding. "We'll do what we can. But you need to be prepared. This won't be easy." Aiden didn't need to hear more. He knew what he was getting into. He had known from the moment he'd found Ekko in the woods that the road ahead would be tough. But there was something about this Colt, something that reminded him of himself. They were both survivors, both carrying scars that no one else could see. When Aiden loaded Ekko onto his uncle's trailer, he was quiet. There were no words to say. His uncle, Marcus, didn't try to speak either. It wasn't that Marcus didn't care. He just didn't understand. Not yet. At home, Aiden set up a temporary stall in the barn. His uncle watched from a distance, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Aiden didn't need to explain. There was no need for words. The bond between him and Ekko was already forming, even if it was still fragile, still tentative. He worked through the night, cleaning the Colt's wounds, gently brushing his coat, and offering him water. Ekko, despite his blindness, seemed to sense Aiden's presence. His ears twitched whenever Aiden came close, and his head turned toward him with a soft, trusting nicker. Aiden spent the next few days with the Colt, learning his habits, his fears, and his needs. The Colt flinched at every sound, every movement, as if the world was too much for him to process. He refused food for the first day, and Aiden had to coax him into eating by sitting quietly beside him, softly talking to him, letting the Colt hear his voice and know that he was safe. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Aiden wanted to give up, when the silence of the barn felt too heavy and the weight of his own loss threatened to pull him under. But he didn't. Not this time. Not when the Colt was counting on him. Slowly, as the days passed, Ekko began to show small signs of improvement. He nuzzled Aiden's shoulder one evening, a light, hesitant touch, as if testing whether Aiden could really be trusted. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was a sign that Ekko wasn't just surviving. He was beginning to trust. Aiden took that small victory and held on to it, carrying it with him through the long, lonely nights. He wrote in his journal each day, documenting the Colt's progress, the challenges they faced, and the breakthroughs that kept him going. Each entry was a promise to himself, to Ekko, and to the memory of his parents. It was a promise that no matter how broken they both were, they would rebuild together. One evening, as Aiden sat next to Ekko's stall, reading softly to him, his uncle approached, his boots heavy against the barn floor. "You really think this blind horse is worth all this effort?" Marcus asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Seems like a lost cause." Aiden didn't look up from the book he was reading. I don't think it's about whether he's worth it, Aiden said quietly. It's about whether I am. Aiden sat alone in the small, dimly lit kitchen, the papers spread out in front of him. Ekko was resting in his stall, still weak, still struggling, but slowly gaining strength with every passing day. Aiden's uncle had given him some space to work, but he could sense the unease in the air. His uncle didn't quite understand what was happening. No one did. But Aiden was determined. This Colt, this broken creature, was more than just an animal in need of care. He was a reminder of everything Aiden had lost, and everything he still had the chance to save. On the kitchen table, Aiden spread out the papers from the vet's office, medical records, rehab plans, and most importantly, the history of the Colt. Ekko's origins were as much a mystery as the Colt himself. But Aiden was determined to uncover the truth. His mind raced as he sifted through the paperwork, trying to piece together the story that lay hidden behind the name Ekko. The Colt didn't belong to just anyone. His origins were tied to something much bigger, something darker. Aiden's fingers froze when he saw the branded scar on one of the papers. It was a mark, one that Aiden had seen before. He had heard whispers about it, the mark of Marshall Trent, a powerful rancher in the area, known for breeding the finest horses in the region. Aiden's heart skipped a beat. He knew who Trent was, and everyone did. Trent was a man of wealth and influence, someone who controlled the local horse market with an iron grip. If anyone had the power to make decisions about horses, it was him. The papers in front of Aiden confirmed his worst fear. Ekko was no ordinary colt. He was the product of one of Trent's prized stallions, a horse with rare bloodlines, a bloodline that made him worth thousands, maybe even millions. But there was a catch. Ekko was born blind. In the eyes of Marshall Trent, a horse without sight was nothing more than a burden, a mistake, and mistakes, as Trent saw them, didn't deserve a place in his world. Aiden's stomach twisted as he read the rest of the details. It was clear what had happened to Ekko. When Trent had discovered the colt's blindness, he had ordered the foal to be disposed of. Quietly, the paperwork said, no one needs to know. The ranch had quietly dumped the colt in the woods, leaving him to die. They had discarded him like trash. Aiden slammed the papers down on the table, the sound of it echoing in the empty room. He could feel his blood boil, his pulse racing in anger. Ekko wasn't just a blind horse. He wasn't just an animal with no value. He was a creature who had been thrown away, cast aside by someone who saw only profit, only perfection. Marshall Trent had made a decision for Ekko, but Aiden wasn't going to let that be the end of his story. He stared at the papers for a long time, his mind whirling with thoughts of Trent, of the ranch, and of the cold, heartless way they had treated Ekko. Aiden had been discarded once before. People had written him off, too, after the crash that had taken his parents in his arm. But he wasn't done. He wasn't going to be. The more Aiden thought about it, the more his resolve hardened. Ekko wasn't just a broken horse. He was a symbol, a reminder of everything that was wrong with the world. Aiden couldn't let Trent get away with this. He couldn't let anyone get away with treating a living being like that. He was going to fight for Ekko, not just because the colt deserved it, but because Aiden did too. They both had something to prove. That evening, Aiden took a walk to the back of the ranch, where Ekko's stall was tucked away in a corner of the barn. The colt was awake now, nibbling on a small pile of hay Aiden had left for him. His blind eyes were wide, searching, always searching for something he couldn't see. Aiden stood quietly at the entrance to the stall, watching Ekko. The colt's ears twitched as he heard Aiden's footsteps, and for a moment Aiden thought he saw the faintest flicker of recognition in Ekko's eyes. He stepped closer, and the colt nudged his shoulder, a soft, tentative touch, like a question. "It's okay," Aiden whispered, rubbing Ekko's mane. "You're not alone anymore." Aiden had read somewhere that horses were creatures of habit, and that they relied on routine and consistency. And in a way, So was he. Every night he would sit with Ekko, reading to him, talking to him, letting the colt get used to his voice. And every night, Ekko would respond in small ways, flinching less, moving closer, accepting the comfort Aiden offered. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Aiden feel like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. As the days passed, Aiden's thoughts turned more and more to Marshall Trent. He knew that Ekko was worth something, worth more than Trent had ever seen in him. The colt wasn't just a product of bloodlines, he was a survivor, and Aiden was going to make sure that he got the chance he deserved. The decision was made. Aiden would go to the Spring Creek trials. You're not to win, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to prove something to himself and to Ekko. He was going to show them both out that there was more to life than perfection, that there was more to strength than bloodlines. And if Trent didn't like it, then Aiden would fight him with everything he had. But first, Aiden needed to get Ekko ready. He had no idea how long it would take, or how difficult it would be, but he knew one thing for certain. Ekko would be there, with him, and together they would prove the world wrong. The barn was quiet, the only sound the soft shuffling of hooves as Ekko moved restlessly in his stall. Aiden sat nearby, legs crossed, his journal open in his lap. The words blurred as he stared at the page, lost in thought. It had been weeks since he found Ekko, and although the colt had grown stronger physically, the emotional scars were still there. Ekko didn't trust easily. Not yet. Every noise, every sudden movement sent him skittering back into the corner of his stall, eyes wide with fear, as if expecting the world to crush him again. Aiden could see the colt's fragility, but more than that, he could sense the deep, unspoken pain that lay within him. Aiden had read somewhere that horses relied on their senses, especially hearing and smell, far more than sight. Ekko's blindness had created a barrier between them, one that Aiden knew he had to break. But trust wasn't something that could be forced. It was something that had to be earned bit by bit, sound by sound. And so, Aiden began to experiment. Every morning, without fail, Aiden would walk to the barn and begin his routine. He would start by brushing Ekko's coat, gently running his fingers through the colt's fur, speaking to him in soft, soothing tones. But it was the rhythm of the sound that he hoped would start to make a difference. Aiden tapped his boots lightly on the floor as he moved around Ekko's stall. He hummed a quiet, familiar tune, a song his mother used to sing to him when he was younger. At first, Ekko didn't respond at all. He would freeze, his ears flicking nervously at the strange noises. But Aiden didn't stop. He continued with the rhythm, with the soft, constant tapping of his boots, the hum of his voice. A steady, repetitive sound that Ekko could begin to associate with comfort. Day after day, Aiden sat with Ekko, repeating the same actions. Sometimes, when the colt seemed particularly anxious, Aiden would sit quietly beside him, tapping his boots in a soft, steady beat. It wasn't a quick fix, and Aiden knew it wouldn't be. But each day, Ekko's movements became less hesitant, his reactions a little slower, less frantic. One evening, after a long day of work on the ranch, Aiden sat in the barn with the colt as usual. The barn was cool, the light dimming as the sun began to set. Aiden tapped his boots, the familiar rhythm filling the silence. He glanced up to see Ekko standing near the far side of the stall, his head slightly turned toward him. The colt's ears were focused on the sound, and his breathing had slowed, no longer quick and nervous. Aiden smiled to himself. It was small progress, but it was progress nonetheless. He leaned forward, gently calling to Ekko, "Hey, buddy, you want to come closer?" Ekko's ears flicked, and for a moment Aiden thought the colt might run off, but instead he took a cautious step forward. His hooves moved quietly over the straw-covered ground, the sound soft, almost hesitant. Aiden stayed perfectly still, watching as Ekko approached, inching closer to him. Then, just as he had with every other step, Ekko froze. His head lifted, his nostrils flaring as if unsure of what to do next. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest, But he didn't move, didn't break the rhythm of his boots tapping against the ground. He kept humming, his voice a constant thread in the air. It was a song that held memories. Memories of a time before all the pain. Ekko's body twitched, then, slowly, carefully, the Colt took another step forward, and then another. Aiden's breath caught in his throat. He didn't want to scare Ekko, didn't want to push too much too soon, but he couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. "You're doing great, Ekko," Aiden whispered, his voice low, soft. "I'm right here." With one more careful step, Ekko reached the edge of Aiden's outstretched hand. The Colt's nose brushed against Aiden's palm, a tentative touch, but it was enough to make Aiden's heart swell. It was a beginning, a moment of connection. Ekko had chosen to trust him, just a little bit, but it was more than Aiden had hoped for in those first few weeks. For the next few days, the same routine continued. Aiden would arrive each morning and evening, always with the tapping, always with the humming. And each time, Ekko came closer. The Colt was learning to trust the sound of Aiden's voice, the sound of his footsteps. The rhythm was no longer something to fear. It had become a signal, one that told Ekko he was safe, that Aiden was there to protect him. But it wasn't just the rhythm of Aiden's voice, or the tapping of his boots that was making a difference. It was something more subtle, something that couldn't be captured in a single sound or gesture. It was the bond they were building, the quiet understanding that neither of them was truly alone anymore. They were both broken in different ways, but together they were beginning to heal. The barn had become their sanctuary, a place where the world outside didn't matter. Aiden would sit with Ekko for hours, talking to him, reading to him, humming softly. And every day, Ekko grew a little stronger, a little braver. One evening, after a particularly long day working on the ranch, Aiden was sitting in the barn with Ekko when his uncle, Marcus, walked in. He had been quiet about the Colt, unsure of what to make of the strange bond that had formed between his nephew and the blind horse. But as he stood there, in the dim light, watching the two of them, something in his expression softened. "I never thought I'd see the day," Marcus said, shaking his head with a small chuckle. You and that horse. You're both pretty stubborn, aren't you?" Aiden looked up and smiled. "Yeah, I guess we are." And for the first time in a long while, Aiden didn't feel so alone. The sun hung low over the ranch, casting long shadows over the fields as Aiden worked in the barn, his hands moving automatically as he mucked out stalls and fed the horses. Ekko's stall was always the last one he tended to, and though the Colt had grown stronger, Aiden could feel the tension in the air. There was no denying that Ekko was still an enigma. The Colt had made tremendous progress, but in town people were starting to talk. Aiden's cousin, Jeremy, had always been the loud one in the family, boisterous and cocky, with an opinion about everything. From the moment Aiden had arrived at the ranch, Jeremy had made it clear that he didn't think much of Aiden's quiet, reserved nature. But it wasn't just Aiden who got his mocking treatment, no. Jeremy's newest target was Ekko. "Still spending all your time with that blind horse, huh?" Jeremy sneered one afternoon, strolling into the barn with his hands in his pockets. "What's the matter, Aiden? You find a new pet project?" Aiden didn't look up. He'd gotten used to Jeremy's comments by now, the jabs that always seemed to find their mark. They were just words, after all, but every so often, the pain of it would creep up. When the words were too sharp, too personal. "He's not a pet project," Aiden said, his voice low but steady. "He's a living creature. He's not broken, Jeremy. He's just different." Jeremy scoffed, shaking his head with a mocking grin. "Yeah. Well, that's your problem, isn't it? You always think you're going to fix things. But this horse..." He gestured dismissively toward Ekko's stall, where the Colt stood quietly, his head low as he nibbled on some hay. "This horse is just as messed up as you. The blind leading the one-armed. It's pathetic." The words stung, but Aiden didn't flinch. He had learned by now to keep his emotions in check when it came to Jeremy. There was no point in fighting back. Jeremy's words were hollow, and Aiden knew it. What did he care what someone who had never been through loss or struggle thought? Aiden took a deep breath and stood up, wiping the sweat from his brow. I don't need your approval, Jeremy, he said, his voice firm, and neither does Ekko. He's not here to impress you. Jeremy's smirk faltered, but only for a second. He took a few steps closer to Ekko's stall and looked the colt over with a dismissive glance. Whatever you say, man, he muttered, but I'll tell you right now, you're not going to win any ribbons with a blind horse. Aiden clenched his jaw, but he held his tongue. It wasn't worth arguing with Jeremy. He had no idea what it felt like to be discarded, to be overlooked, and neither did anyone else in town. They didn't understand the bond that had formed between Aiden and Ekko. It was more than just some project. It was about trust, survival, and a promise that neither of them would give up. Not now. Over the next few days, Aiden noticed the murmurs that followed him everywhere he went. The townspeople had begun to take notice of his connection with Ekko, and not in a good way. Whispers of the boy and his broken horse had started to spread like wildfire. It didn't matter that Aiden was doing everything he could to help Ekko heal. All that mattered was that they were different. They were both broken, and that made them easy targets. Aiden walked into town one afternoon to pick up supplies, his mind elsewhere. As he passed by the diner, he heard the laughter. He didn't need to look up to know they were talking about him. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. But today, something about it felt different. As Aiden neared the diner, he saw a group of people sitting by the window, their eyes following him. "Hey, look, it's the blind horse kid," one of them called out, snickering. Aiden didn't respond, didn't even look in their direction. He kept walking, his pace steady, but inside, the words hit harder than he cared to admit. It was one thing for Jeremy to mock him. It was another for the entire town to think that they had the right to judge his life, his decisions, and his relationship with Ekko. But even as the ridicule stung, something else stirred within him. A deep, quiet anger, a drive to prove them wrong, to show them that Ekko wasn't broken. And neither was he. He knew the Spring Creek trials were fast approaching. They were supposed to be a way for him to prove that Ekko had value. But now they had become more than that. They were a way for Aiden to prove to himself and to everyone else that he wasn't just a broken boy. He wasn't just the kid who had lost everything. He was capable of more. And Ekko? Ekko was capable of more too. Aiden spent the next few days working harder with Ekko than ever before. The Colt had made progress, but the upcoming trials meant that they needed to step up their game. Every morning, Aiden worked on getting Ekko to trust him more, to listen to the rhythm of his voice, to follow the tap of his boots as he navigated the course. Every evening, Aiden would sit with him, reading aloud, humming the same tune that had become their signature rhythm. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect, but they were getting there. One evening, after another long day of training, Aiden sat in the barn with Ekko brushing his coat gently. He could feel the warmth of the colt's body beneath his hands, the muscle and strength slowly returning. And as he sat there, quietly, the world outside the barn felt far away. "I'm going to show them," Aiden whispered, the words barely audible. "We're going to show them, Ekko. We're not broken." Ekko nuzzled his shoulder in response, a soft, trusting touch that made Aiden's chest tighten. It was the only answer he needed. The morning of the Spring Creek trials arrived with an air of tense anticipation. Aiden woke early, his body stiff from the long nights spent working with Ekko. The colt had come so far since that first day in the barn, but Aiden knew that the trials were going to be different. And this wasn't just a casual competition. It was a statement. A statement about him, about Ekko, and about the world that had tried to write them off. Aiden stood outside the barn, the sun just beginning to rise over the hills. The morning mist clung to the grass, and a cool breeze whispered through the trees. He glanced over at Ekko's stall, where the colt stood waiting, his dark eyes focused on the distant horizon. Ekko was calm today, a rarity in the face of the unknown. Aiden had done everything he could to prepare the colt for this moment, but In the end, it was up to Ekko to show the world what he was capable of. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was their moment. There was no turning back now. Marcus had offered to drive Aiden to the trials, but Aiden had declined. He wanted this moment to be his, alone with Ekko. They had been through so much together, and this was the culmination of everything they had fought for. As the truck rumbled down the dirt road toward Spring Creek, Aiden's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear the sound of the Colt's hooves in his mind, the steady rhythm they had practiced for so long. It was all coming down to this. When they arrived at the venue, Aiden was taken aback by the sheer size of it. The field stretched out before him, filled with bright banners and tents. The sound of voices buzzing with excitement. Horses and riders were everywhere, each more polished and confident than the last. There was an air of expectation, of certainty, as if everyone already knew who the winners would be. Aiden felt small in the midst of it all. The colt beside him wasn't the polished, perfect animal everyone else had brought. Ekko was raw, unrefined, and most importantly, blind. But Aiden refused to let that define them. He knew they could do this. They had to. He led Ekko to the staging area, where the competitors were being assigned to their courses. The colt moved hesitantly at first, his hooves tentative against the grass. But with Aiden's steady hand at his side, Ekko slowly gained confidence. It wasn't easy. Nothing had ever been easy for either of them. But the colt trusted him. That trust had carried them through everything. Aiden's turn came up quickly. The trial course was a series of obstacles, bars to jump over, cones to weave through, and narrow paths to navigate. It was a test of skill, speed, and precision. But Aiden didn't care about winning. He just needed to show that he and Ekko were capable of something more. He needed to prove to himself, to the world, and most of all, to Ekko that they were not broken. The crowd fell silent as Aiden and Ekko took their position at the start line. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop, and Aiden could only hear the steady beat of his own heart. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting Ekko's blind gaze, and whispered softly, "We've got this." The signal sounded, and they were off. Aiden's mind cleared as he guided Ekko through the first obstacle. The colt moved with surprising grace, his steps fluid and sure, despite the lack of sight. Aiden's taps on the ground, the rhythm of his boots, were enough to guide Ekko through the course. They moved as one, steady, calculated, unhurried. The crowd watched in silence as Aiden and Ekko moved through the obstacles, each step more confident than the last. But then, the worst thing that could have happened. The loudspeakers blared, a glitch in the system causing a loud, jarring noise to echo through the arena. Ekko froze. His body went rigid, his ears flicking nervously, and for a terrifying moment, Aiden thought they were done. But he couldn't afford to stop now. "Come on, Ekko," Aiden whispered, his voice calm and steady. "It's okay. You've got this." He began to hum the song, a melody that had become their lifeline, their rhythm, their connection. It was a sound Ekko knew, a sound that had brought him comfort on the worst days. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ekko began to relax. His body softened, his breathing evened out, and with a tentative step forward, he resumed the course. Aiden's heart surged as he felt the colt's trust return. It wasn't about speed or perfection anymore. It was about the bond they had built. They moved together, smoothly and precisely, through the rest of the course. The crowd watched in awe as Aiden and Ekko completed the trial, slow but steady, their movements in perfect sync. When they crossed the finish line, there was no roar of victory, no wild applause, just a quiet, stunned silence. And then, as if the tension had finally broken, the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't the loudest or the fastest performance, but it was a performance that had captured something far more important: the power of trust, of perseverance, of defying the odds. Aiden looked down at Ekko, his heart swelling with pride. They had done it. They had shown the world that they were capable of something more than people had ever believed. As Aiden led Ekko back to the staging area, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find a man standing behind him, his posture rigid, his face inscrutable. "You're Aiden Rivera, right?" the man asked, his voice low and authoritative. Aiden nodded, unsure of what was coming next. The man extended his hand. "I'm Marshall Trent." Aiden froze. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Marshall Trent, the man who had abandoned Ekko, who had cast him aside as if he were nothing more than garbage. Aiden had heard the whispers about Trent's wealth, his influence, his reputation as one of the most powerful horse breeders in the area. "I've been watching you," Trent continued, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at Ekko. "That Colt of yours has rare bloodlines. I'm willing to offer you $10,000 for him. Consider it a generous offer." Aiden felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. He knew what Trent was offering, a way to buy Ekko back, to turn him into nothing more than a commodity. Aiden clenched his jaw, his voice steady but firm. "You threw him away once," Aiden said, his eyes meeting Trent's with defiance. "I'll never let you do it again." Trent's eyes flashed with irritation, but Aiden didn't back down. The offer had been made, but there was no price that could ever buy Ekko's worth. And with that, Aiden walked away, his head held high, Ekko beside him. The arena was alive with energy as the Spring Creek trials reached their final moments. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the sprawling grounds, and the crowd buzzed with excitement as the last competitors prepared to take their turn. It had been a day filled with quick, elegant performances. Horses galloping through obstacle courses, riders displaying intricate maneuvers with the grace of dancers. And now, it was Aiden and Ekko's turn to take the stage once more. Aiden could feel his heart hammering in his chest, the familiar pressure building up. It wasn't the crowd that made him nervous. It was the fact that they had already proven themselves. Ekko had already done something extraordinary. The problem now was that they had set a standard. Aiden wasn't sure if they could repeat their earlier success, let alone improve on it. But as he walked toward the starting line, Ekko at his side, he felt something shift in the air between them. The Colt had come a long way since that first day in the barn. Every day spent in the barn, working through the course, every hum, every tap of Aiden's boots had brought them closer. And now, as they stood at the edge of the arena, Aiden realized something. They had made it this far not because they were perfect, but because they had each other. They had built something deeper than skill. They had trust. And trust was all they needed. He leaned forward, tapping his boots against the soft earth, signaling Ekko to step forward. The Colt's hooves clopped quietly on the ground as he moved beside Aiden. Ekko's head was high, his ears alert but not fearful. Aiden could feel the Colt's trust in him, his confidence in the rhythm of their steps, in the sound of Aiden's voice. The announcer's voice cut through the air, calling their names, and Aiden took a steadying breath. This was it. They were ready. As they entered the course, the crowd fell into a respectful silence. It was clear that the other competitors had finished their trials quickly, skillfully. Most had raced through, their horses performing flawlessly in perfect synchrony with their riders. But Aiden wasn't racing. He wasn't here to impress anyone with speed or flair. He just wanted to show the world that Ekko could do it. They could do it together. The first obstacle approached. A low wooden hurdle, nothing too difficult, but one that required focus. Aiden tapped his boots and murmured softly, keeping Ekko steady. The Colt's ears flicked toward the sound, and Aiden felt Ekko gather himself. The Colt surged forward, clearing the hurdle with ease, the two of them moving as one. As they moved to the next section, a series of cones to weave through, Aiden's heart raced faster. This was the part of the course that demanded precision. Each turn had to be sharp, each movement calculated. The crowd watched intently as Aiden and Ekko approached the cones, the Colt's head low, ears swiveling, focused only on Aiden's voice and the rhythm of his feet. Aiden's breath came in shallow gasps, but his hands remained steady as he directed Ekko through the serpentine path. Every tap of his boots was a cue, every word of encouragement a lifeline. Ekko moved fluidly, his steps sure and careful, weaving around the cones with precision. Aiden felt a thrill in his chest as the colt responded, as if all the hours spent training together had led to this moment. Then, the loudspeaker buzzed. It was a small glitch, the microphone crackling with static. For a second, Aiden's heart froze. The crowd shifted nervously, murmurs rippling through the audience. Ekko froze. His body went stiff, his eyes wide, searching the space. The familiar anxiety returned, the panic of unpredictability, the reminder that he couldn't see the world around him. Aiden's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was the moment they had practiced for, the moment they had feared. The horse he had trained, the colt he had fought for, was now in danger of freezing up entirely. But Aiden didn't panic. He couldn't. This was Ekko's test. Aiden gently placed his hand on the colt's neck, his voice calm and steady. "It's okay, Ekko. You're okay. Just listen to me." He began to hum the familiar tune. It was their song, the one they had practiced to every day, the rhythm that had become their anchor. Aiden kept tapping his boots, a soft beat that matched the song. Ekko's body trembled slightly, but after a few moments the colt relaxed. His breathing evened out, and his ears turned toward Aiden's voice. It was the sound that Ekko trusted. Aiden's steady rhythm, the melody that had guided them through so much. Slowly, Ekko moved forward again, his steps hesitant at first, but then more sure. The crowd held its breath, watching as Aiden and Ekko continued the course, unperturbed by the glitch. As they cleared the final obstacle, a set of narrow wooden beams to navigate, a cheer went up from the crowd. It wasn't loud, but it was heartfelt. People were watching something raw, something real. Ekko wasn't perfect. Aiden wasn't perfect. But together, they were something more. Aiden led Ekko to the finish line, his heart still racing, his body trembling from the effort. The colt's hooves came to a gentle stop, and Aiden placed his hand on Ekko's neck, breathing out slowly. The crowd sat in stunned silence, and for a moment, Aiden thought it might be over. He had done it. They had done it. But then the applause started, slow at first, unsure, and then building as more people stood and clapped. The sound rolled through the arena, a rising tide of appreciation. It wasn't the kind of applause he had imagined, the kind given to the fastest, the flashiest competitors. It was the kind of applause that came from witnessing something unexpected, something that defied all odds. Aiden didn't care about the applause. He cared about Ekko, about what they had just accomplished together. Ekko was no longer just a blind horse. He was a symbol of trust, of perseverance, of overcoming what others said was impossible. And Aiden was no longer just the boy who had lost everything. He was the boy who had gained something even greater. They weren't done yet. But today, they had proven something that no one could take away from them. Aiden sat at the small desk in his bedroom, a mess of papers scattered in front of him. The legal documents, the trial results, the photos of Ekko's rehabilitation. They were all stacked in neat piles, each one more intimidating than the last. As he ran his fingers over the papers, Aiden could feel the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just a fight for Ekko's future. It was a fight for his own. Marshal Trent had done what Aiden knew he would. The moment the performance ended and the crowd had erupted into applause, the rancher had made his move. The offer to buy Ekko for $10,000 had been a subtle maneuver, one that Aiden had already turned down. But what came next was a different kind of challenge. Trent had filed a legal motion to claim ownership of Ekko, citing the colt's rare bloodlines and branding it as the ranch's property. Aiden had been expecting this, but it didn't make it any easier to face. He had always known that there would be people like Trent who would see only Ekko's pedigree and not his worth as an individual. They wouldn't see the bond, the trust, the quiet strength that had been built between the colt and the boy. No. To people like Trent, Ekko was just another asset to be traded, a commodity to be bought and sold. Aiden knew that if he was going to keep Ekko, he would have to fight. fight harder than he had ever fought for anything. The court date was set. The battle was underway. The first day of the legal proceedings was a blur. Aiden had never been to court before, and the cold, sterile environment only added to the overwhelming sense of unease that gnawed at him. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, speaking with the vet who had treated Ekko, and compiling the photos and rehabilitation records that documented the Colt's journey. But none of that seemed to matter when they stepped into the courtroom. The polished, expensive suits, the stern faces of the judge and jury. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis. Aiden felt small, insignificant, and out of place. On the opposite side of the room, Marshal Trent sat with his legal team. The rancher looked every bit the part, confident, poised, and utterly sure of himself. Aiden could feel his eyes on him, cold and calculating, as if he were already counting the Colt as his own. The proceedings began, and Aiden's heart pounded in his chest as the lawyer representing Trent stood up to speak. The lawyer's voice was smooth, confident, as he laid out the argument for Trent's claim of ownership. He spoke about Ekko's lineage, the prestige of the ranch, and how Trent had every right to claim the Colt as part of his breeding program. The defendant, the lawyer said, gesturing toward Aiden, has no legal claim to this animal. Ekko was bred on Mr. Trent's ranch, and his bloodlines are of great value. The Colt was merely discarded as part of the ranch's operations, but his true value, his potential, has always been with Mr. Trent. Aiden's stomach churned. The lawyer's words were filled with condescension and an utter lack of understanding. Trent saw Ekko as nothing more than a prize, a valuable asset. He didn't see the Colt's spirit, his resilience. He didn't see how much Ekko had given to Aiden and how much Aiden had given in return. Ekko wasn't just a product of bloodlines. He was more than that. When it was Aiden's turn to speak, his hands trembled as he stood up. He was terrified, but he couldn't back down now. Not after everything they had been through. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice quiet at first, but gaining strength with every word. Ekko isn't just a horse to me, Aiden said, his voice steady despite the nerves that threatened to take over. He's not some possession to be claimed or bought. He's my friend, and we've been through a lot together. When I found him, he was dying. He was abandoned. No one cared about him. But I did, and I've spent every day since then making sure he has a chance to live. Aiden's eyes flicked to Ekko, who was standing quietly in the corner of the room. His head turned slightly, as if listening to every word. The vet can attest to the work I've put in, Aiden continued, his confidence growing as he spoke. This horse wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me. No one else would have given him a chance. He's more than just a horse to me. He's part of me, and I won't let anyone take him away. The judge nodded thoughtfully, but Aiden could see the skepticism in the eyes of the jurors. He knew that he wasn't going to win this. Just by speaking from the heart, he needed more than just passion. He needed evidence. Aiden sat down, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this wasn't over. The battle for Ekko's future was far from won, but he also knew one thing. He wasn't going to stop fighting. Not for Ekko, and not for himself. Over the next few days, the legal arguments continued. Trent's lawyers presented more documents, more evidence that tried to paint Ekko as property, as something to be claimed. But Aiden didn't back down. The vet's testimony was crucial. She spoke about Ekko's injuries, his rehabilitation, and how the Colt had made a miraculous recovery, thanks to the care Aiden had provided. Aiden's neighbors spoke on his behalf as well, describing the countless hours Aiden had spent working with Ekko, earning the Colt's trust when no one else would. The turning point came when Aiden's final witness took the stand, the judge's own horse trainer. The trainer, a local man who had known both Aiden and Trent for years, spoke frankly about the bond between Aiden and Ekko. "I've worked with both of these men," the trainer said, his voice clear and calm. "What Aiden has done with Ekko, There's no way anyone could have gotten that horse to perform the way he has without real trust. A bond. I've seen it. That horse trusts him. The courtroom fell silent as the words settled in the air. The judge looked thoughtful, and for the first time, Aiden felt a glimmer of hope. The ruling came days later, and it was a moment that Aiden would never forget. The judge, after hearing all the evidence, turned to face the court. "A horse follows who feeds him," the judge said, his voice steady. "But a blind horse, he follows only the one he trusts." Aiden's heart leaped in his chest as the judge's gavel came down. Ekko legally belongs to Aiden Rivera. Aiden felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. He had won. Ekko was his. The soft morning light filtered through the barn's open doors, casting long shadows across the weathered wood of the floor. Aiden stood at the far end of the barn, his back to the world as he surveyed the space that had, over the past year, become so much more than just a place to keep horses. It was a sanctuary, a safe place for those who had nowhere else to go. Ekko stood nearby, grazing peacefully on the fresh hay Aiden had just spread across the stall. His body was sleek and strong now. The colt Aiden had found in the woods a year ago was gone, replaced by a horse who had learned to trust, to thrive, and to live without the constant fear that had once consumed him. Aiden had worked tirelessly to turn the barn into something more than a home for just him and Ekko. With the money from the legal settlement and the prize money from the Spring Creek trials, Aiden had been able to set up the space as a small rescue, a haven for other animals in need of care. He'd named it Echoes of Hope. It had been a simple choice, really. The name had come to him one evening as he sat in the barn with Ekko, the two of them silent, just being in each other's presence. Hope had been a hard thing to come by, for both of them. But in their silence, in their shared moments, they had found something even greater than hope. They had found trust, and now they were giving that trust back. The door to the barn creaked open, and Aiden turned to see his uncle, Marcus, step inside. Aiden smiled at him. It had been a difficult year for both of them, but through it all, Marcus had come to understand the depth of the bond between Aiden and Ekko. He had seen firsthand what the colt had done for Aiden, and vice versa. "You're up early," Marcus said with a grin, taking off his hat and wiping his brow. "I figured you'd be asleep for a few more hours after last night's victory." Aiden chuckled. "I couldn't sleep. Too much to do." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Always more to do, huh?" Aiden nodded, turning back to Ekko. "It's never just about the horses. It's about what we're doing here. Giving others a chance like Ekko had." Marcus looked around, his eyes softening as they landed on the several pens and stalls scattered across the barn. There were a few horses there, but Aiden had also started bringing in other animals in need of care. Dogs, goats, and even a few cats. People had started to hear about Echoes of Hope, and some had brought in animals that had been neglected or mistreated. Aiden had made it his mission to help as many as he could, just as he had helped Ekko. He wasn't in it for the fame or the money. He was in it because he had been there once, on the edge of losing everything with nothing but his own strength to rely on. Marcus followed his gaze and then let out a low whistle. "I never thought I'd see the day when you'd be running a place like this. You've come a long way, kid." Aiden's smile widened, and he shrugged. "I had help." "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice turning softer. "You've always had that horse by your side." Aiden turned back to Ekko, who had raised his head at the sound of Marcus's voice. The colt nickered softly, his dark eyes following Aiden's every movement. There was a time when Ekko wouldn't have been able to stand in the same room as someone else without reacting. But now he stood, calmly, his trust in Aiden unwavering. Aiden walked over to Ekko, running his hand through the colt's soft mane. The bond between them had grown so much stronger, and in that moment Aiden knew they were no longer just two broken souls. They had healed in their own way, and they had done it together. "I was thinking about the kids," Aiden said after a few moments of silence. "You know, the ones from the schools in town. Some of them could really benefit from being here. With Ekko." Marcus glanced at him, a puzzled look on his face. What do you mean? I want to start offering something more, Aiden explained, like structured visits for kids, maybe kids with disabilities, or kids who've been through trauma. Ekko and I, we could lead silent walks or something. We could let them connect with the animals, with him. Marcus looked at him thoughtfully, clearly considering the idea. You think it'll work? I know it will, Aiden said, his voice full of conviction. Ekko and I, we've both been through things that most people can't understand. But maybe if we share that with them, if we show them that even when you're broken, you can still be strong, it'll help. Marcus nodded slowly, a smile tugging at his lips. Well, kid, it sounds like you got a plan. I've got a lot of plans, Aiden said, his grin widening. And this one's just the beginning. Later that afternoon, Aiden stood at the front of the barn, looking out at the fields behind the property. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the land, casting everything in a warm, quiet glow. Ekko stood beside him, his head low as he grazed, content and at peace. Aiden couldn't help but think of everything they had been through, how far they had come. From the day he had found Ekko in the woods, lying helpless under the barbed wire, to the Spring Creek trials, where they had proven the world wrong. Now, they were here, at the beginning of something new, something bigger. And Aiden knew that this was just the start of their journey. He looked down at Ekko, reaching out to gently touch the colt's mane. We're going to do great things, buddy. I promise. The wind rustled the trees around them, and for a moment the world felt still. Aiden stood there, side by side with Ekko, knowing that they had both found something precious, something that no one could take away. A few days later, Aiden opened the barn doors for the first group of kids who would visit Echoes of Hope. They were a diverse group, each one carrying their own story of hardship. Some had autism, others had physical disabilities, and some had simply been through more pain than any child should bear. But as they entered the barn, their faces lit up, and Aiden could see the hesitation slowly melt away. Ekko stood calmly at the front of the barn, his dark eyes meeting the children's gaze. Aiden walked up beside him, placing his hand on the colt's back. This is Ekko, he said softly. He's been through a lot, just like you. But he's here to show you that you don't have to go through it alone. The kids slowly walked toward Ekko, their hands outstretched, and as they touched the colt's coat, they smiled. It was a simple moment, but it meant the world to Aiden. As the day drew to a close, Aiden stood at the barn door, watching as the children left. Their faces were different than when they had arrived. Lighter somehow. And he knew deep down that he and Ekko had just begun to change lives. Aiden looked over at Ekko, who stood silently beside him. The colt's ears flicked, and for a moment, Aiden swore he saw a knowing look in Ekko's eyes, a look that said, "We've got this." And together, they did.